Okay, I'm going to shoot a short video here about the installation of the Potfiller faucet in my house. This is the Delta model 177LF. It's the Arctic stainless, I believe. So Arctic stainless is basically the whiter color of stainless, more like what you see in stainless steel faucets today. Here it comes in this box. What's included? This is the faucet. All right, you have some anchors and screws, and you have the attachment mechanism here, and we can talk about later when we attach it. The first step that I think I need to do is decide where to place this on the wall, and you need to be really careful because you need to know which way is on and which way is off for these valves. As it turns out, off is down for this valve right here. So you need to make sure that you have clearance above your stove for this to be turned down. And you also need this to be able to be turned both forward and to the side. So if we were to mount this backwards, which you can do like this, you'd be turning the valve into the wall. So if you're going to do that, you probably have to take the assembly apart and change the valve around. So the best, easiest way is to make sure that you have the elbow on this side, turn this around, and that way the off position, the off and on position will be here and won't hit the wall when this is flat against here. So I believe that's the off position for both. Okay, so when I decided to position this faucet, I wanted to look like it's in the center of the opening. So I made a lot of marks on the walls, but the faucet's actually going to go here, which basically centers it left and right in the blank space in the opening. I also wanted to make absolutely certain that if I were to install a stove that had back controls, that this had room to clear the back of the stove. So the distance that I put this above this floor, say measure out, is 50 inches. That's the lowest I could go and make sure that I had room for a regular stove with backward controls. The new stove that I'm putting in actually has front controls, so that won't be an issue. But this should allow me to fill a pot that is really huge if I have one on the stove. So the first step was to find the stud, because that will also influence where you put this. I was lucky because my stud basically went right down the middle of my stove. So all I had to do was come out in the middle. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to extend the line where my faucet goes for the center line out well and away from where I'm going to cut out, because I'm going to cut out part of this sheetrock over to the center of the stud and over to the center of the next stud. I'm going to install a piece of 1/2 inch plywood because I want something solid for this to mount to. And since we're putting tile over the top, it doesn't really matter because it doesn't have to be a nice smooth finish. But if I wasn't going to tile it, I would still put it in a piece of plywood and mud over the top of it, tape and mud over the top of it, so I had something substantial to screw the screws into, because I really don't want to have to use anchors for something as heavy as this faucet. Okay, I use my vibrator saw to take out a square that goes from the center of this stud to the center of that stud, and it's 6 inches tall. So I think the first step is we're going to put a 2x4 across the back of here, sideways to hold the plumbing out, and then we're going to put a piece of plywood over the front in order to be able to screw into it. Okay, quick tip for taking out these nails. These are tile nippers, and they are excellent for being able to pull out nails without damaging the surfaces around them, and they really work excellent. Watch this. So take this around the head of the nail. Don't squeeze very hard because you'll actually cut the nail off, and that's useful as well. And just continue to grab little pieces of the shank of the nail, pull it out. Okay, so here is the pipe stubbed out. I stuck a temporary, fairly long 4-inch nipple in here and capped it so I could pressure test it. Also, I'm going to pull the cap off now and shut the water off again. I'm going to pull the cap off so that I can drill a hole exactly the pipe size and put it put a piece of plywood over the top. So this is going to be covered with a piece of 1/2-inch plywood, which will give us a good base to mount the faucet to. Okay, I just temporarily screwed this in just to see where it would lay. My current stove with the controls on the back, is the very top of it's 46 inches off the ground. This knob comes to just almost 48, so that ought to be plenty of clearance for a normal type stove. I'm going to put in a front control slide out, so I'm going to actually have, you know, 10 or 15 inches maybe above. This particular faucet actually gives you a rise between the very bottom and here. That's why I've mounted it a little lower, and I didn't want to hit my cooktop, but it will come out basically beyond the cabinet range all the way across, and I can even fill over here on the side of the cabinets over here. So it's huge. It's just huge. All right, so then it'll go back in like so, and it'll of course be closer to the wall once I get the tile done. I'll put in a shorter nipple, but the long nipple will help us get it out easily without hurting the tile. It gives us something to grip to, and I also know that it's 4 inches, so that'll give me something to measure to once the tile's in, so I know what size nipple to put in. I'll probably put in a brass nipple. Not sure, because this is stainless, whether it makes any difference, but that is a brass shower head type elbow, so we'll see how that works out. Okay, this is a piece of 1/2-inch plywood, cut 16 inches to fit across, give ourselves something to screw to, and because I have the space, I went ahead and cut another piece 14 inches wide, and the 14-inch piece I will glue up to the 16-inch piece, so that gives us a full inch, and I have the space, so I might as well. I have a full inch then to screw to make this rock solid. So I finished building the filler plate that goes into the hole we put into the wall. If you see here, glued and stapled in a few places just for hold this together. The 14-inch board has at least 1/4 inch clearance on either side to go between the 14.5-inch spacing that goes between the studs, and the other board is 16 inches to go right on center with the studs. Bored a hole here for the pipe, measured about twice, more than twice, 3 times probably for that. So, and one way to measure is you can lay this hip up against the pipe here, make a mark, lay it up against the pipe on the side, make a mark. I guess my watch is in the way. Up against the side and make a mark, and then transfer that over to get your center. So I drilled about 1 1/8 hole, I think, and this fits snugly in here. It's slightly lower than the finished sheetrock, which is okay because that'll fill with mastic when we put the tile up. So now I'm going to run just some little short 1 1/4 sheetrock screws, probably 3 or 4 on each side, and that'll give us a serious base to screw our faucet to. The way the faucet mounts is the piece here that screws in. First, I mean, there's actually a rubber washer behind it, but there's a piece here that screws in, and you want to make sure that you remember where your plumbing goes, because you don't want to be driving screws into your plumbing just in case they're long enough. They probably aren't, but they might be. So we'll make sure we set this side by side so it straddles the plumbing. If your plumbing comes in from the side, you need to turn it the other way, because this is where the screws go in to hold everything. Okay, so I'm going to finish tacking this up, and then we can start our tile project, and we'll come back when the tile is finished. We'll pull this nipple out and we'll mount this permanently. Okay, so the tile is up and the nipple sticking out way past the tile. I only need 1/2 inch. So if I measure this nipple that originally was 4 inches, it sticks out 2 inches from the wall. So I need to take 1.5 inches off of it. So I need to buy a 2.5 inch nipple to replace this one. I'll take it out, get a 2.5 inch nipple. Okay, so I screwed this in temporarily in order to be able to mark the holes to drill and also to start the screws. when we get done, we're going to need to make sure we don't forget to put the chrome bezel on. So I'm just checking the screw holes right now, and it's good to have this centered up on here and centered up on the nipple. So I went ahead and screwed it in temporarily so that this would fit the brass piece centered where it's supposed to be. Okay, one last shot up close before we button everything up and test the water. Went ahead and make sure that you put the gasket between the brass fitting and the wall, then the brass fitting. Don't forget to add this before you tighten the plumbing. You get this turned on about as far as you can and as tight as you can. Make sure you use plenty of tape and pipe dope, and then you use an Allen wrench on both sides to tighten the brass fitting against the faucet so the faucet doesn't turn back and forth. So you basically bolted this faucet now to the wall through these two fittings, one on each side. And we're going to turn the water on and see what happens. Okay, here's the pot filler installed. I ended up taking out the nipple and getting a shorter one. Actually had to make one slightly shorter. Used a brass nipple right here because if the nipple's too long, a ½ inch is plenty sticking out. I'd err on the short side because this little cover right here will snap past this if it's not screwed in far enough. So I had that issue. I pulled it out, getting myself about 1/4 inch shorter nipple, and then I flushed it. I pulled the filter out and the screen out, and flushed it. So here we are. This is Potfiller in action. The great thing about these things is they shoot like 4 gallons a minute. This is a huge stock pot on the stove, and we're going to fill it with water.